After the pandemic, and for most parts of 2023, supply chains were working smoothly. But if you look at what's happening at Red Sea now, it's a stark reminder that supply chains are still not normal. To talk about global trade, the issues with supply chain, and what to expect in the future, we have with us today John Pearson, CEO, DHL Express. John, good to have you with us today.
Pleasure.
My first question to you would be, we had the global connectedness report, and it talked about, globalization being at its peak in 2022 and remaining strong in 2023. It also says that contrary to the notion that the world is going towards deglobalization, globalization is in fact very much there and, alive. What has led to that conclusion?
So, firstly, I'm very happy that we chose New Delhi and India to publish this report. You can imagine that decision was made a year ago, and it's turned out to be the best possible location. Why do I say that? Maybe we come to that in a minute in some of the specific things in India, but there's so much we can say about this report. I'll try and be concise with it. Global connectedness is pretty much at an all-time high. Globalization is not giving way to regionalization. So nearshoring, friendshoring, offshoring, stronger regional trade is not taking place in a way that affects that particular KPI, which suggests that global trade still moves 6,500 kilometers. And mathematically, if everyone was going to Mexico to service USA, that distance would come down. Thirdly, and importantly, it said that there is no fracturing, there is no trade fracturing along geopolitical lines and allies trading with allies in one area and allies trading with another. That's an important and hotly contested topic. And if you take Russia and the decoupling of Russia with Europe out of the equation, then the extent to which trading blocs are trading happily together is exactly the same as prior years. That's very important. And then the fourth thing I'd say in relation to India and my earlier comment is two things. One is that India is firmly at the center of people's global expansion plans in terms of regional offices, in terms of warehousing, in terms of manufacturing. That's clear. And a different way of saying that is that India, other than any other country in the planet, other than the USA, is attracting the most inward FDI investment. So people are putting their money on the India horse, so to speak, and I can't think of a better vote of confidence than attracting inward investment to the level they have, other than the USA, and being the second place of a statement in the confidence of things that are going on in India.
You touched on aspects like friendshoring, nearshoring. So is that more hype than substance, or is it just too early for us to?
Well, I think, if you sort of Google nearshoring, as I have done, there's articles written in 2002, 2003, 2004, and it's rather interesting because I think it is a proof point. The case where nearshoring has taken hold a little bit, and I'm very happy to see this because I was there just a month ago, is in northern Mexico, in Tijuana and various cities close to the border, in terms of supplying the USA. And some of that nearshoring is Chinese companies moving there, and some of it is other companies moving there to satisfy the demands of the USA market. So I think it has been hype. It is becoming a little bit of reality, but I can only point to one example, and that's the one I just gave you, where it is the case. So I think this is why these data points and the fact-based study that we publish are so important, because there is a lot of conjecture and hype. Everyone after the Icelandic ash cloud crisis said we're going to change all our supply chain setup. Everyone during or after the pandemic said we must do this and we must do that. What has changed? Not very much. That sort of east-west trade route set up on the basis of efficiency and economics have served customers and customers very well in terms of getting product to market at an economic level, in an efficient way. And neither did the global supply chains fail during the pandemic. In fact, the extent to which there was a demand shock, they actually coped very well indeed. So I think there is a lot of hype. That necessitates the need for real data points that come out with real conclusions. There will be changes in the level of globalization, or a different face of globalization, perhaps. One good example of that is sort of India's rapid emergence in building and making more competitive their internal logistics infrastructure. I was here 2 years ago where the national logistics policy, round about that time, was being published. And in many senses, that's music to our ears because it's making India more competitive, rail, road, sea, air, in terms of companies operating here, and India being a great place to make things in. So hats off and kudos to for the government for doing that. Another example of the changing sort of face of globalization whilst being more connected than ever before is China plus one. China plus one is also a misunderstood term. In one sense of the word, it is multinational companies from the West saying, we don't want to leave China. We want to de-risk a little bit and set up facilities in a small number of companies actually came through in the last report. Indonesia, India, Philippines, Vietnam, Mexico, and Turkey seem to emerge in the global trade atlas as the beneficiaries of China plus one. But it also means that there are Chinese companies that seek to be closer to their end customers, and they themselves are setting up offices in Vietnam and Thailand and so on and so forth. And the best, again, authenticity I can add to that is DHL Express is putting Mandarin-speaking Chinese salespeople from DHL China into Jakarta, into Hanoi, and possibly into Mexico to, figuratively speaking, meet the Chinese executives off the plane and say, we're here to partner with you and in local language and local culture, be able to help you set up your offices.
So when it comes to India, what are the things that the country can do possibly to get into another gear now, given the context of supply chain around the world?
Well, I should try and remain balanced, but it's hard to contain my enthusiasm or applause for some of the things that appear to me obvious that India have been doing. So I think it's more of a case of carry on and don't get distracted, because the way in which foreign companies see India as an investment case, the ease of doing business, which relates to tariffs and taxes and so on and so forth, the pace at which the government move on that particular journey of making India a great place to make things in is a good one. And I'm not here to point to any specific examples, but the quicker the local infrastructure, the national infrastructure is built out, and the ability for people to bring things in through the gateways and the hubs and the airports of India, and likewise out, will see no end of benefit.
If you look at the WTO's goods barometer, it's coming at around 100.6 at the moment. In November, it was around 100.7. And they're saying that, merchandise trade has almost stayed the same, not showing any signs of growth. You in an interview last year has said that, you'll always be optimistic when it comes to global trade. Are you still optimistic about how trade is, happening in 2024?
The pandemic was almost a sort of defibrillator, shock to the system, and it took a while for companies and countries to recover. And it came at a time when inflation was high, energy prices were high, the labor market sort of swiveled and pivoted in ways that people didn't anticipate, and some people chose to get out of. I give the example, I'll try and be concise with it, of issues in Heathrow Airport during a couple of summer goes, and I was interested to hear that maybe some of the employees that decided to leave were the most experienced ones, and companies that keep their employees motivated and keep the experience in the company are able to ride these these problematic surges in holidays or travel, and which obviously happened after the pandemic. So we're coming through that now. This has been a rather protracted sort of weakness in the global economy and global trade, but the report again, talks about how resilient global trade has been. I tend to believe business heals and business is rather self-resuscitating. Companies are looking, as produced in the report, corporate globalization, under the sort of phrase of corporate globalization, companies are looking to international markets more so than ever before for driving their top line sales and ultimately driving their profits and finding new customers. So I am positive about it, and the level of globalization discussion in the report talks to that. And there are plenty of countries, and India is one such example. DHL Express India is one such example where we see very strong growth right here, right now. And there are other parts of the world. There's this mercurial nature of trade. When one door closes, another one opens. And the geographical footprint of DHL in 220 countries, we expect to get back into Afghanistan, servicing all industries and all sectors, both B2B and B2C. And you can't overestimate the importance and the surge and the rise of e-commerce. 3 years of growth in 6 months during the pandemic, and all the other channels from large customers to SMEs. And interesting, the SME base in India, those small and medium-sized customers that make up a lot of our revenue base. When you have that sort of geographical footprint, we have a strong market share in just about every market. Our competitors aren't necessarily having the same aspirations and ambitions, being very US-centric. No one country is more important to DHL than any other, including our home base in Germany. So, I look at, each market on its own merit, and we invest in it on its own merit. So I am optimistic about global trade. The data points in the study suggest that I should be, and it's been rather resilient during these rather difficult times that we've been through.
How do supply chain companies plan for the future? So when you are sitting down to plan that, this is the things I'm going to do, what is it that you look at? Do you look at geopolitics? Do you look at climate change? Do you look at, the wars? How do you plan?
Yeah, so I think we keep a close eye on some of the most written about geopolitical topics. That's clear. We need to be ahead of that, and we have strong teams in the background that are very aware of that. But coming to something like the Red Sea crisis, my old boss said to me, John, we're a global company. There'll be a crisis somewhere every day, and it just about is the case. I think it's difficult to plan. I think in a network where you own your own assets and you have partnerships, long-term, short-term, the access to commercial belly space and so on and so forth. Most of these crises in our world relate to the ability to move things from A to B. In the pandemic, we were designated an essential service, so moving things on the ground was very easy. But when airports closed and when the restriction, a lot of this is about an aviation topic. But I give you a great example of how planning, isn't necessarily the most important thing, but rather having experience in your network operations teams and aviation team is the most important. Is the Icelandic ash cloud crisis. 2010, one day it wasn't there, the next day it was. For 30 days, no aircraft were flying in European airspace, apart from, on many occasions, DHL aircraft. Our relationships with the authorities were able to fly. But when we weren't able to do that, we put our entire network onto the ground. And that is a good example of how teams mobilize with experience, using the assets that they have, the relationships and the partnerships that they have, to basically configure the European network to a ground network overnight. And so it was with the pandemic. We tried to look around the corner. As soon as we were satisfied with something, we tried to look around the corner to foresee and anticipate what was coming next. The Red Sea, obviously, we have strong operations in the Middle East, and we have to we continue to fly in there, whether that be relationships, permissions, or anything else. We're typically, first in, last out, and so it was the case with Israel. And the Red Sea situation with the Houthis in Yemen and the situations with sea freight. Well, firstly, it's not I don't run the division that was affected by that, but yes, it caused some anxiety and volatility. It increased, transit times to a point for a period of time. When it first started, it happened at the time some issues within the Panama Canal, unrelated to any military or terrorist activities. And there was a lot of discussion about it. As such, prices went up, prices peaked. Here we are 3.5 months later. You will have noticed likewise that it's not in the news so much, and the situation to some extent has dissipated and so on.
So, what has Red Sea done to air freight? It's normal to assume that air freights must have gone up significantly. Has that happened? How are things looking?
Well, air freight has normalized, as I say, it's not my division, but I can talk generally on the topic. When the pandemic was in existence, capacity was very scarce. People that had their own airline were in extremely good position. You had to make sure your aviation assets were in the right place and utilized to the maximum possible extent. Here we are, 2 years on. Air freight have normalized, capacity has normalized and is available, and on most sectors, prices have come down. A good example of that is our opportunity to use commercial belly space, which during the pandemic was either not available or extremely expensive. And now we can get back into using CAL, commercial airlift, to the extent we do. And then if you imagine that virtual network of owned, long-term leases, short-term leases, 30 days, 60 days, and commercial belly space, that's the optimum way in which we can configure our network. So the world is rather normalized to one extent, but against that backdrop of the phrase, it's still winter, but spring will come.
Last question to you would be, what are your plans for India, and what are you looking at globally?
And so, the plans are similar for India as to what we're looking at globally, in the sense that the growth demands will continue to build out our infrastructure, our own infrastructure of service centers, gateways, hubs, and aviation. And that is no different in India. As I think I mentioned maybe earlier, I'll say it again for your listeners, is that the last 3 visits to India have been opening facilities, either service center gateways or service centers, all 3 in fact. And we continue to expand in India. India is an interesting country for us in many ways. One, in the sense that all 4 divisions, DHL Blue Dart e-commerce, DHL Supply Chain, DHL Global Forwarding, and DHL Express are very present here for some time, very present here as a great place to work, and very present in terms of investing. 2 years or 3 years ago, Supply Chain announced a €500 million investment over a period of 4 or 5 years from memory. We have announced, so to speak, a 200 million investment over the coming years, which is the type of things that I've just been referring to. We'll continue to invest in the big themes of the DHL group, which is worth saying, is globalisation, which is what we're here to talk about now, sustainability, which is what we just commented on, e-commerce, which is there every day and every facility you walk through, and digitalization. So we'll continue to invest in the big themes, and rather more physically, we'll continue to invest in infrastructure. And I can only congratulate India on the progress it's been making. I come here just about every year, and every year, if I'm opening a facility, it means we're growing. It's one of our fastest growing countries in the network right now. That is another data point on top of the 9 million. And I would be surprised if it wasn't, in the sense of the PMI, the Purchasing Manager Index in India, being at 57 and way above that contraction level at 50. The GDP percentage, and trade is always a percentage of GDP. And it being the 5th largest economy in the world, I'd be surprised and disappointed if we weren't having a good run at things. And my conversations with the team the day before yesterday confirmed that not only are we a great place to work, but we're performing in a robust way and health as a business. So I'm very proud of our people here I'm proud of our partnership with various associations, government bodies, and regulatory authorities that help us and work with us to achieve what we want.
Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.